In this tutorial, I'll show you how to create this satisfying spinning rings looping animation in Blender. So I'm going to show you how to create this exact animation here in this tutorial. Now, if you'd like to help support the channel and purchase the project files, then you can get that on my Gumroad store and my Patreon page. Links are in the description. Now, this tutorial will work great in both the Cycles and Eevee rendering engines. So here it is in Cycles, but I'll just switch it over to Eevee. And you can see it works fine in Eevee as well. So you can use whichever render engine you want. I'm going to be using Cycles though, because I'm going for realism. Now for the metal material and the wood materials, I'm going to be using some procedural materials which I've already created. So for the metal, I'm going to be using my procedural scratched metal, and I have a tutorial on how to create that, so you can check out that video with the link in the description, or you can also support the channel by purchasing that material. Link to that's also in the description. And then this wood here is going to be another procedural wood material that I created a little while back. So again, you can either watch the tutorial or you can purchase the material. Now to get some nice realistic lighting in the scene, I'm also going to be downloading this Blue Photo Studio HDRI. This is a free HDRI from polyhaven.com, and I'm going to be downloading the 1K version and the HDR version. And then I'll also be downloading some free sound effects from freesound.org, and I'll be adding those sound effects in the video editing once we actually render the frames and we're video editing the frames together. So we'll be adding those sound effects to add just a cool atmosphere in the background. Now just one more thing before we start. If you like doing animation in Blender and you want to learn more about animating in Blender, then I highly recommend checking out this animation course. P2 Design's a live animation course is packed with tons of animation learning content. Great for beginner and intermediate Blender users. This course will teach you the basics of animation, adding keyframes, interpolation modes, using the timeline, graph editor, and there are also some beginner animation exercises in the course. The course also shows you how to make a walk cycle and has some other animation tutorials. Check out the course with the link in the description, and if you purchase the course through my affiliate link, you'll be helping to support this channel. Alright, so here we are in a new scene in Blender, and I will have my screencast keys right down here in the corner so you can see what buttons I'm pressing during the video. So I'm just going to start by selecting everything, and we'll hit X, and then we'll just delete everything. So I now want to add the sphere, which is going to be in the very center of the spinning rings. So let's go to the Add menu, let's go down here to Mesh, and I'm going to add a UV sphere. Now right after I add the UV sphere, I'm going to go into Edit mode, and I want to rotate the sphere over on the X axis, and I'll type 90 and Enter to rotate it over by 90 degrees. So if I press 1 on the numpad to go to front view, you can see the top of the sphere is right there. And then I'll go back to object mode, and I want to press Control 1 to add a subdivision surface with 1 level. If I go here to the modifiers, you can see I've added a subsurf with 1 level. Let's turn the viewport and render levels both to 1, and then I can use the object context menu to just shade that smooth. And then we should also save the file, so let's click on File, and we'll click on Save As. And I'll rename it to spinningringstutorial.blend, and just click on Save As, and then you can press Ctrl S as you're working on the project to save it. Now I want to add a ring which is going to be around this circle. So I'm going to go into edit mode, and then I'm going to hold down the Alt key and just select that loop there, and then hold down the Shift and Alt key and select those other 2 loops there. I'll press Shift D to duplicate. We can scale the entire thing up a bit so that it's a little bit bigger, and then I can extrude it. And then after I extrude it, we're going to scale it. Now, I don't want to scale it down on the y-axis because the y-axis is going to be going back and forth, but I want to have the same thickness. So I'll just press Ctrl Z to undo that. So again, E to extrude, then we can hit S to scale, and to not scale it on the y-axis, we can press Shift Y. So now it's going to be bigger or smaller, but it won't be scaled on the y-axis. So I'll just bring it here inside the sphere, and then if I go inside the sphere, I can hit X. Let's just delete the faces there because we don't need those extra faces. And then what I'll do is press the L key with my mouse hovered over those vertices there, and I'll scale the entire thing in just a little bit more, so scale that down. And then I want to kind of sharpen up the edges, so I'll press Ctrl R to add a loop cut. We'll click and drag, drop a loop cut there, and Control R, add another loop cut, and we'll add a few more loop cuts. So we'll add another loop cut here to kind of sharpen up that edge, and one more, Control R, click and drag, and place the loop cut there. And then you can see the normals need to be recalculated because the shading is a bit weird. So select everything with the A key, and I'll press Shift N to recalculate the normals. And then one more time, I want to scale this ring a bit smaller. So I'm going to hover my mouse over the object and hit the L key, and we'll just scale the whole thing down just a little bit. So scale it down about like that. So if I go back to object mode, you can see there is a nice ring there around the sphere. Now, if I press 1 on the numpad to go to front view, I want to add a little tube which is going to come out on this side of the sphere, so on the front of the sphere. And that little tube is going to connect to the other rings. So I'll go into edit mode. I'll hold down the Alt key and select that loop there. I'll duplicate it with Shift D, and let's bring it out on the Y-axis, and I can scale the whole thing up a little bit, and then I can extrude it back in on the Y-axis, scale that up, and again, you can see we need to recalculate the normals. The shading is kind of weird, so select everything, and press Shift N to recalculate the normals. And then we'll hold down the Alt key and just select that loop there. Let's bring it out a bit, and then I can extrude it, and then scale it down. We're going to make it quite a bit smaller, and bring it out a little bit. And then we can extrude it out, and we'll bring it out to about that far. And then you can see that it's kind of smooth here, so I want to make it sharper. I want to make those edges sharper. So I'll add loop cuts by pressing Control R. I can drag a loop cut there, Control R, drag another loop cut there, Control R, and one there, and then the last one, add another loop cut there, just to kind of sharpen up those edges. And then I can go back to object mode, and in object mode, again, I'll use the object context menu to shade that smooth. That's looking pretty good. So now we want to add a new object, which is going to be those circles. So let's make sure we're in object mode so we can add a new object. I'm also going to press Shift C. Shift C will make sure the 3D cursor is in the center of the scene. So I can now go to the add menu, and this time we're going to add a new circle. And then I will go into edit mode of the circle, and I'm going to scale the circle out, and I want to scale the circle so that it is bigger than that sphere, but I don't want it to be too big so that it doesn't connect to that little pipe there. I want to just scale that down, something like that. So now I want to go here to kind of the side view, and actually I'll just press 3 on the numpad to go to side view, and I'm going to bring the entire mesh down on the Z-axis, kind of bring it down to about here. Then I'll hit E to extrude, we'll hit Z, bring it up on the Z-axis, and place it there so that it has some thickness. So instead of just like extruding it up to make it thick, I'm going to add multiple ones, and I want them all to have the same thickness. So let me just press Ctrl Z to undo that. So instead of extruding it to make it thick, I'm going to add the solidify modifier to make that thick. So I'll go to the add menu, we're going to search for the solidify modifier. This is over here on the modifier properties, and then here I can turn up the thickness value, and I just want to turn that up kind of to about there so that it is a bit thick. And then also I want to add the bevel modifier, because if I go back to object mode, you can see it's quite sharp on the edges. So we'll go to add modifier. We're going to search for the bevel modifier, and I can scroll down here, and we're going to turn the segments up a bit. So we'll turn the segments up to like a 4. And then this amount here, I can drag the amount way down to make the bevel really thin. So now you can see there's just a small bevel there on the edges, and that'll give kind of some nice reflections on the edge of the metal piece. And then finally, I also want to add a subdivision surface modifier, because you can see it is a little bit low detail on the edges. So we'll press Control 1. Control 1 will add a subsurf modifier. We can scroll down here. We want to make sure that the viewport and render levels are both set to 1. And then we can use the object context menu and just shade the object smooth. So now I want to make many more other rings. So I'll press 7 on the numpad to go to top view. And I will select the object here. I'll press Shift D to duplicate the object. And then I will just right click so it stays where it is. Then I'll go into edit mode, and I want to scale the entire thing up, but I don't want to scale it bigger on the Z axis, because if I scale it up, it's also going to get bigger on the Z. So I'll hit S to scale, then I'll hit Shift Z, and we're going to scale that up to kind of about there. Let's press 7 on the numpad for top view. So S to scale, Shift Z, just scale that up and kind of make it about an even amount in between those rings. So something like that's pretty good. And we're going to do this 2 more times. So I'll go back to object mode, Shift D to duplicate, right click. We'll go back into edit mode. We can scale the entire thing and then hit Shift Z so it excludes the Z axis. Place that about there. And then one more time, go back to object mode, duplicate the object, place it where it is. We'll go into edit mode, and we will scale the entire thing, Shift Z to exclude the Z axis, and we'll just stick it about there. All right, so I can go back to object mode, and those are going to be the 4 rings which will rotate around. So I now want to take this pipe here, and I want to also duplicate that and make the pipes which are going to be in between all the rings. So let's go into edit mode of this object, and I can hold down the Alt key and just select that loop there, and then I need to go to the wireframe view, hold down the Shift and Alt key and select that loop there and go back to solid view. So I'll now duplicate it with Shift D, and then we can bring it over. So bring it over on the Y-axis and stick it about there. And then I want this to be its own object. So I'll hit P, and we're going to choose selection. So it's its own object. Go back to object mode. I can select this part here. We'll go back into edit mode. We'll select everything, duplicate with Shift D, bring that over there, and then hit P by selection, go back to object mode, select this, go back into edit mode, select everything again. We're going to duplicate it, bring it over on the y-axis, stick it there, and then P by selection, and then go back to object mode. So you can see these are now their own objects. Now I want the pipe objects to be joined to the rings because these are going to be their own object, then these are going to be joined together, and these are going to be joined together. So to join them together, the modifiers have to be the same because the objects will use the same modifiers. So both of these objects have the subdivision surface, but this object has the solidify and the bevel. So I'm going to select this ring here, click on the solidify and press Ctrl A, and also click on the bevel and press Ctrl A to apply it. So I can now select the tube and then shift select the ring and press Ctrl J to join it together. So if I go into edit mode, you can see they're now one object. Let's do the same thing for the other rings. So I'll select this ring. We're going to click here and apply the solidify with Ctrl A and also apply the bevel. And then we can select the tube and shift select the ring and join it together by pressing Ctrl J. So that's an object and that's an object. And then we're going to do that one more time. So we're going to select the ring. We'll apply the solidify and apply the bevel. And if we select this object and shift select this object, we can press Ctrl J to join it together. So now we have this object here, then this ring, and then we have this one and this one and this one. So I now want to rotate all the rings so that they are ready to be animated because I don't want them to be placed here. I want them to be placed at different rotations. So let's select this first ring here, and then I'll hit 1 on the numpad to go to front view. And then I'll hit R to rotate, and I'm going to type -45 and then enter. So -45, and that's going to be the starting position for that first ring. So let's now select the second one here, and this one I'm going to go to side view by hitting 3 on the numpad, and then I'll rotate this by 90 degrees and hit enter. So now you can see it's rotated up by 90 degrees, but I want this part here to always be connected so it actually looks realistic, like they're actually all connecting. So I want to rotate this over. So I'll hit 1 for front view, and then I can rotate this and I'll type in 45 and enter. So now that's rotated over by 45 degrees. So you can see this part is connecting here, and then this part connects to this one here. Let's select the third one now. So for the third one, I'll hit 1 on the numpad for front view, and I want to rotate this by 90 degrees so that it is rotated up, but then you can see that it isn't actually connecting. The pipe piece isn't connecting up here. So I'll hit 3 on the numpad for side view, and I'll rotate this one by 90 degrees, hit enter. So now you can see that's connecting there on the top. And then this last one here, this one is connecting right here, so I'm going to leave that how it is. So this here is going to be the starting position for all these objects. Now, before we actually animate this, we need to parent some of the objects to the other objects, so that when I move one of the objects, the other objects which are parented to it will move along with it. So we're going to parent all the objects from the inside out. So we're going to select the sphere here, and then I'll shift select this ring, the inner ring. Then I'll press Ctrl P, and we'll set parent to object, keep transform. So because this one was selected last, this is the parent. So if I move this one, then the sphere is going to move along with it. But then the sphere can move on its own. So let's select the inner ring, and then I'll shift select the next ring. I'll press Ctrl P to object, keep transform. And then I want to select this ring here, and we're going to select the next one. So shift select that. That one is selected last. Ctrl P, object, keep transform. And then finally this one to the outer one. So select this one, shift select this one here, Ctrl P, object, keep transform. So now we can rotate this one, that'll move everything, but then this can rotate and it'll move everything, and you can see it can continue to go down and move all the objects. I'm going to press Ctrl Z though, just to bring those objects back to where they were. Now for my animation, I'm just going to use 250 frames, which is the default. If you want to make your animation longer, you can of course turn it up, but I think 250 frames is a good amount of time for this looping animation. So we're going to start by going to frame 1 on the timeline. So make sure that your frame is on frame 1. And I'm going to start by animating the ones out here, and then I'll animate them more and more as I go in. So let's select this one here, and I'm going to go to the front view by hitting 1 on the numpad. And I want to rotate this one all the way around by 360 degrees. So I'm first going to hit the I key, and I'm going to click on rotation. So inset keyframe, rotation. And you can see now, because we were on frame 1, it adds that little diamond there on frame 1, and that is a keyframe. So let's now go all the way over here, and to make it a looping animation, we need to go 1 frame over the end frame, and that is because the start frame and the end frame would be the same exact frame, and so I need to go 1 frame over so that it'll actually be perfectly looping and seamless. So go to frame 251, then I can hit R to rotate, we'll type in 360 for 360 degrees, hit enter, and then to insert a keyframe, I can hit the I key and we'll just choose rotation. So if I now hit the space bar to play this, you can see it rotates around, but it starts out slow and then gets faster and then slows down again. And so to fix this, I'm going to select the keyframes in the timeline. So hit the A key with your mouse in the timeline, and I'll hit the T key to bring up the set keyframe interpolation. And I'm going to choose linear. And this way it's going to play at a consistent speed through the entire animation. And you can see it also loops because when it goes to the end, it jumps back to the starting. Now, as well as it rotating along this axis, I want to make it more interesting by rotating it along another axis. So I'm going to rotate it along the Z. So let's hit 7 on the numpad to go to top view. And then again, I'm going to go to frame 1. And we already have a keyframe here, but you can just hit I, hit rotation to make sure there's a rotation there. And then let's go all the way over here to frame 251 on the timeline. And I'll hit R to rotate. And then this time I want to type in -360. So hit enter. And then again, we'll hit I and choose rotation. So instead of rotating it 360 degrees, we're going to rotate it negative, so it'll rotate around the opposite way instead. So now if I press the space bar to play the animation, we have this really cool rotation here because we're rotating it negative on the Z axis, and then we're rotating it positive on the Y axis. So that's a really cool rotation. So let's go back to frame 1, and I'm going to select the second ring. And then I'll hit the 1 on the numpad to go to front view. Now, if I rotated this one over positively by 360 degrees, it would move very fast because this object is rotating the other objects. So then if this object rotated and then this object rotated, it would rotate around really fast. So I'm going to have it rotate the opposite way around. So hit 1 on the numpad for front view, and then make sure you're on frame 1. We'll hit the I key and we'll insert rotation. So I'm now going to go all the way over to 251, which is 1 frame after the end frame. Now, if I were to rotate it just by 360 degrees negatively, it actually wouldn't move at all because this rotation is rotating by 360, but then if this rotation rotated by -360, since they are both 360, the rotations would cancel each other out. So I want to rotate this one over by 360 negatively, but I want to do that twice. So it is double the speed. So if I just bring up a calculator, if I take 360 degrees, which is all the way around, I can times that by 2. So 2 complete rotations is going to be 720. And then instead of it rotating positively, I want to rotate it negatively. So we'll close this. So make sure you're on frame 251. I'm going to rotate this by a -720 and hit enter. So -720, hit the I key, and then we'll choose rotation. So now if I play through this, you can see there's this really interesting animation. So you can see this one here is actually rotating negatively, so it's rotating backwards. But then there's the other object which is also moving it because it is parented to the larger one. So now we have a really cool animation. And because we rotated it on the y-axis, it's rotating from this point here, which is where that little tube is. And so it looks like it's rotating correctly. All right, now the third one here, if we go back to the starting, this third one here, this one I'm not going to animate. I'm just going to leave it how it is because it is parented to this object, so it is being moved by the other object. But then the very smallest one here, this one, I want to rotate this one over on the x-axis. So let's hit 3 on the numpad to go to side view, and that way we're looking from the x-axis here on side view. And then again, we'll go to frame 1, we'll hit the I key, we can insert rotation, then we're going to go 1 frame after the end frame, which is 251, and we're going to rotate this, and we're going to type in 360 and then hit enter, and then we'll hit the I key again, and we'll choose rotation. And then just select everything with the A key and then move your mouse in the timeline and press the A key to make sure all the keyframes are selected. And we're going to hit the T key again, and we're going to make sure we use the linear keyframe interpolation so that they all move at the same speed. So now if I play this, you can see we have this really cool animation here in the center. So this one we rotated by 360 degrees, but it's also being moved by this object because it is parented to that object. So now we have this really cool animation, and you can see even though it's moving around very randomly, it still looks like it's correct. It looks like it could actually rotate from that little pipe there because these are staying on the same rotation. So the rotation axis is following the rotation of that tube there. So now that the animation is finished, we can do the other things like the lighting and the materials. So let's click here on the world properties, and I'm going to click here on the yellow dot next to color, and I'm going to choose environment texture, and I'm going to be opening up that HDRI that I mentioned at the beginning of the tutorial. So let's open the HDRI. So here is the Blue Photo Studio 1K HDRI that I'll be downloading from polyhaven.com. It is a free HDRI, and the link will be in the description. So let's just double click on this to open it in, and then I can hold down the Z button and move my mouse up into the rendered view to see how that's looking. And as I mentioned earlier, I will be using the Cycles rendering engine because I am going for realism, but you could definitely use the Eevee rendering engine if you wanted to. And then also to make the colors look a bit nicer, let's go here to the render properties, and I'm going to open up the color management tab right here. And on the view transform, I'm going to use Filmic, and then on the look here, I'm going to choose very high contrast to pop out the colors and make things more contrasty and saturated. Now, as for the materials, I'm going to be using my procedural scratched metal material, and I'm also going to be using a procedural wood material that I created. So I have tutorials on how to create both of those materials, so if you'd like to watch those tutorials, the links will be in the description, or you can also help support the channel and purchase those materials on my Gumroad store or my Patreon page, so links will be in the description. And also, if you purchase the finished project files of this tutorial, then you'll get access to those materials. So because I've already created those materials, I'm just going to import them into the Blender scene. So let's click here on File. I can click on Append. So when you use Blender's Append feature, it'll bring up the file browser, and you can locate to the Blender file where you have the metal material. I'm going to go here into the product files. I'll go here into the blend file, and then I can go here to material, and I can choose the scratched metal material. So if I just select one of the objects and go here to the material properties, I can click on the drop down and I can choose the scratched metal. And if I go into the rendered view, you can actually see that material. And then I do want to import the other wood material as well. So let's click on File, and I can click on Append again. And so here is the procedural wood material that I created a little while back. So I'll go inside the product files, then I can go here to Material, and then I can choose the procedural wood, so let's click on that. And you can see if I click here on the drop down, there's the procedural wood material. So we'll be adding that to a cube, which is going to be underneath the object. So I will go into the rendered mode, and then I'm going to click and drag to box select all the objects. And then lastly, I'll hold down the shift key and select this object here, which has the metal material. I can then press Ctrl L, and I'll choose link materials so that they all have the same material. But then there are a few settings that I want to change to the procedural scratch metal, and this is what's so great about using procedural materials is that they're very customizable. So I want to change a few of the settings. So this scale here, I found that a value of 0.4 looks pretty good. And then this metal color here, metal color 1, I'm going to make this a little bit darker. And then for metal color 2, I'm going to make this a little bit brighter so that the entire metal is a bit brighter. And then for this scratches color, I also want to make this a bit brighter. So on the scratches color, I'm just going to make those a little bit brighter. And then the roughness here, I'm going to turn this value down to like a 0.9 so the metal is a little bit more shiny. And then also the scratches bump strength, I don't want this to be quite as strong, so I'm going to turn it to a 0.05 instead, so it's a little bit less scratchy. Now I want this center sphere here to be the same material, however I want it to be a different color. So I'll hold down the Z button again, go into the rendered view, and here in the material slots, I'll click on the plus here to add a new material slot. Now on the drop down, I can choose the same scratched metal material, but I now want to duplicate this material so that it is a separate material. So we're going to click on this button here, which is like the 2 pieces of paper icon. That's going to duplicate the material, but it's going to use the same data. So now if I click on this to rename it, I'm going to rename it to scratched metal gold. So now if I hit tab to go into edit mode, I want to press the L key with my mouse hovered over that circle there, or over the sphere. And you can select the scratched metal gold and then click on assign. So now that is using the new material. So I'll go back to object mode now. So to change the colors, we can just click on metal color 1, and I want to make this kind of like a gold color. So make it a bit brighter and make it gold. Also here on metal color 2, let's make this kind of a gold color. And then also this scratches color, this one I'm also going to make kind of like an orangey reddish color. So those are the colors that I'm going to use. They're kind of like dark orangey colors to make it look like gold. Now I also want to create that ground, and then we're going to add the wood to the ground. So I'll hold down the Z button, let's go back to solid view, and I'll go to the add menu, and we're going to add a cube to make that ground. And then I'll go into edit mode with the tab key, and I want to scale the object down. I'll scale it down on the Z axis, and I'll type in 0.2 so that it's much thinner. Then I want to scale the entire thing up, and I'll scale it up to like a value of 3, so that's a bit bigger. and then I can also scale it down on the z-axis a little bit more, and then I can also go back to object mode and I'll bring the entire thing down, and let's also bring it back a little bit. So something like that. Now for this ground object here, I want to add a bevel so that the edges are kind of smooth. So if I go here to the modifiers, let's click on add modifier, and I can search for the bevel modifier, and then we can turn the segments up to maybe like a 4, and then also I can turn the amount down so it is smaller, and then I can use the object context menu to shade that smooth. Now let's click here to go to the material, let's click here, and then we can choose the procedural wood material. I'll hold down the Z button and move my mouse up into the rendered view so we can see that wood. And I do want to change a few things. I want to change the scale because it's way too small. Now, back when I created this procedural material, I hadn't actually gotten into creating customizable node groups. So we're going to have to go here to the shading workspace. And in the shading workspace, you can actually see the material. Now I want to change the scale of the entire material. So if I go into the rendered mode, let's just zoom in here so I can see the texture. Now this mapping node is already being used to kind of stretch the texture. So I'll go to the add menu and we're going to search for another mapping node. And we'll put the mapping node in between the texture coordinate and mapping. So I can now change these scale values to change the size of the entire material. So I'm going to click on the first one and then drag down, and then I can drag back and forth, and that's going to change the size of the entire material. I can also hold down the shift key to make my movements more sensitive. Now, the value that I find to work best is a 0.03. So on the scale X, Y, and Z, I'll turn that to a 0.03, and now that wood is quite a bit bigger. Now let's go back here to the layout, and then I also want to add a camera. So I'll go to the add menu, let's go down here to camera, we can just add the normal camera, and then I want to move to where I want the camera to be. So I'm first going to hit 1 on the numpad to go to front view, and then I'm going to just drag up here. So I want the camera to kind of be looking down just like this. Now let's go back to frame 1 actually, so the animation is at the starting. So I'm going to zoom in here, kind of like that, and then once I have pointed my view to where I want the camera to be, I'll press Ctrl-Alt numpad 0, and Ctrl-Alt numpad 0 will bring the camera to where we are. And then also in the camera view, I can press Ctrl-B and I can drag a box around the camera and let go. And this way, it's only going to render in the viewport what the camera can see. So that'll kind of speed up the preview so it won't have to render everything around the camera. Now I want to make the camera a square image. So let's go here to the output properties, and I want to make the X and Y resolution the same value. So I'm going to copy the top value and then paste it here into the bottom one. So you can use whichever value you want, like 1080p by 1080p or 1920 by 1920. I'm going to go with a very large image, so I'm going to use 2560 by 2560. And then I also want to zoom the camera's focal length in a bit so everything looks a bit more flat. So if you select the camera by clicking right up here, you can click here on the object data properties to go to the camera settings. And on the focal length right here, I'm going to turn this up to a 90 so it zooms the camera in a lot so it looks a bit more flat. And then to move the camera around, you can hit G to grab, place it in the center. You can also hit G to grab, and then you can double tap the Z key and then bring your mouse out, and that'll bring everything out. So I'm just going to bring it right in here. So just stick it right about there. And then also if I select the ground object, I'll hit G to grab, and then I can hit Shift Z so it won't be moving on the Z axis. And I'm going to kind of bring it over here and just kind of stick it on the ground. So something like that is pretty good. All right, so I now want to add some more lights because the image is a little bit dark and I want to be able to see more reflections. So let's go to the add menu, and I'm going to go down here to light, and let's choose the area light. And let's bring the area light up. And here on the power, I'm going to turn the area light power to 1000 so it's much brighter. And then I'll also turn the size up so it's quite a bit bigger. So this first area light, I'm going to bring over here kind of where the camera is, and I'll rotate it over, rotate it so it's pointed at the object there coming on the front. And then I'll press Shift D to duplicate the light, and I'll rotate the light over, and I'm going to have another light here kind of on the side, so I'll rotate that over, kind of bring it down, so we have one from the front and then one from the side, and then I also want to have one coming from the back to kind of give it some nice reflections on the back. So I'll duplicate this with Shift D, and I can rotate it over, and I'll go here to the side and rotate it up so that we have another one there on the back. So if I go into the camera view, you can kind of see what those lights are doing. So this one here is kind of giving a nice light there. And then this one here is giving some nice lighting on the side. And then there's the main light there, which is just making things a bit brighter. Now I also want to add a depth of field to the camera so that things which are far away are more blurred. So if you select the camera, we can go here to the object data properties of the camera, and let's turn on the depth of field. Now for this focus object, we can choose the eyedropper, and then we can just select the sphere. Now this f-stop here, if you turn this down, things are going to be more blurred, or if you turn the f-stop up, everything will be more in focus. So for my scene, I found that like a 0.3 is pretty good. So if I zoom in here, you can see kind of that wood in the back is getting a bit blurred, but then there in the very center, that is quite focused. And I do want this object to look like it's kind of a small object, kind of a little trinket, which might be sitting on a table or something. So I want a bit of a stronger depth of field. Now I also want to add a background plane to kind of blur the background even more and also give it kind of a blue color. So let's go to the add menu. I'm going to go here to mesh and I'll add a plane. Let's navigate here to the side, and I want to bring the plane over and kind of rotate the plane, and then I want to scale the plane up a bit so it's kind of way here in the back. Let's press 0 again to go into the camera view, and I can rotate the plane, scale it up a bit more, and bring it down. So I want the plane to be covering whatever the camera can see. And let's now add a material to the plane. So I'll go here to the materials. Let's click on new to add a new material. And this material, I want to click on the surface here, and I want to change it to the glass instead, so it is a glass shader. Now for this roughness here, I want to turn it to like a 0.3 so that it's kind of like a frosted glass, and I'm just doing this so that it kind of blurs the background. And then for the color, I'm going to choose the color, and I'm going to make it kind of like a light blue color, but make it a little bit darker, so something like that. And I'll make that blue color a little bit darker. So now you can see that we have this nice kind of blur background. So it's just kind of this rough glass shader. And so it's blurring the background and also making kind of like a dark blue. And so that really makes you focus on the object. And the background is just kind of more ambient and kind of blurry. All right, so we are now ready to go over the render settings. So let's go here to the render properties. And I want to make sure I turn on the motion blur. That's going to make it look much more realistic because there's going to be blur to the motion, the object which are moving. Let's also open up the light paths here, and let's open up the max bounces. Now, if we turn the light paths down, then Blender will render faster. And if you're using the Eevee rendering engine, this won't matter. The light paths is just in the cycles rendering engine for the light bounces. So I'm going to turn the total to 1 and the diffuse and the glossy to 1, but then all of the other values I can turn to 0. So turn the transmission, the transparent, the direct and indirect light, also the filter glossy, turn all those to 0. And then I can also turn off the reflective and refractive caustics, and turning those off again will make Blender render faster because it won't have to calculate all of these. Also, we can open up the sampling here, and I'm going to use the render samples of 100. I think that is pretty good amount of samples. If you're in the Eevee rendering engine, this won't matter. And then also I will be adding a denoise in the compositor to denoise the image after it renders. But if you want to, you could also use the render denoise by checking on that denoise there under render, but I'm going to use the denoise in the compositor just because I like it a bit better. Now we need to set an output for the frames. So let's go here to the output properties, and here in the file format, you could use PNG as the images, but I want to make the images file size a bit smaller. So I'm going to choose, instead of PNG, I'm going to choose JPEG right here. So choose the JPEG, and then the quality, I'm going to turn this to 100 so it doesn't lose any of the quality, but the JPEG file size is a bit smaller than PNG. Now we also need to make a folder where we're going to save all the frames. So here on the output here, let's click on this file icon. And here in the project files, I'll click on this plus folder here to add a new folder, and I can just call this frames. And then we can go inside the folder, and then we can click on the accept button. So once it renders each frame, it'll save those frames in that folder. So now to render this, let's press Ctrl S again to save, and I'll just press F12 just to render one image. And after this one image renders, we are going to be doing a little bit of compositing. So now that the image has rendered, let's click here to go to the compositing tab. I'm going to click on use nodes to use the compositing nodes, and I want to add a denoise. So we'll go to the add menu. We're going to search for a denoise node, and let's drop this here after the render layers. And from the accurate, I'll change it to fast because it goes faster, but I find it doesn't really affect the quality. And then also I'll go to the add menu, and I'm going to search for a glare node because I think adding a glare would be kind of cool. So let's put the glare after the denoise. Now on the streaks here, I want to change this to fog glow, and on the quality here, I'm going to change it to high. And then also I'll press Shift D to duplicate the glare and drop it here so that we have two of them, so there's a bit more of a glare. And then also we can search for a viewer node. So go to the add menu, search for viewer, and we'll plug the image up to the viewer, and that way we'll be able to see the composited image in the background. And then also I can press the V key to zoom the image out, and Alt V to zoom the image in. So that's how it's looking, and you can see that glare just adds a little bit of glare there to the brightest reflections. So let's save the image again with Control S, and we've already set up the render output. So we can now click on the render and we can choose render animation, or also press Control F12 and that will render the animation. So it will render all the frames and save them to the folder. All right, so once all the frames have rendered, you can just save that Blender file and close it. And I have now opened up a completely new Blender file. So we're going to use Blender's video editor to add in all the frames. So you can click on File and you can go New, and then you can go down here and choose the video editing. So then here in the video editing layout, we can move our mouse here in the sequencer. We can press Shift-A for the add menu, and let's choose Image/Sequence. And then you can go into the folder where you saved all of your frames. You can press the A key to select all the images and then click on Add Image Strip. And also before you click on Add Image Strip, go here to this little arrow drop down and make sure that it's sort by name, because if it's not set sort by name, then the frames are going to be out of order. But you can see this is 1, 2, 3, and so on, so it'll be in the correct order. So I'll choose Add Image Strip. So then once you add in the image, we also want to set the frame rate and the resolution to the same frame rate and resolution as the other Blender file. So we use 24 frames per second because that was the default, but then also on the resolution here, I changed the resolution. So if you select the image strip, you can click on Strip, and then you can go down here and choose Set Render Size. That's going to detect the render size of the images and then set that for the actual render. So you can press the spacebar to play the animation and watch it play through. And then what I can do is select this image here, the image strip. I can press Shift-D to duplicate it, and I can drop it here after this first one. So now if I play through this, you can see once it gets to the end, you can see it plays again and loops, and it's completely seamless. So you can take the end frame here and you can make it much longer, and then you can press Shift-D to duplicate, drop another one, Shift-D to duplicate, drop another one, and you can just do it as many times as you want to make it loop as many times as you want. So I now want to add in those cool ambient sounds, and I downloaded some free sound effects from freesound.org, and the link will be in the description to the free sound effects that I downloaded. So I'll press Shift-A for the add menu, and let's choose sound. So these are the 4 sound effects that I'm going to be using. Again, link will be in the description to these sound effects. So I'm just going to add in this first one here, and you won't actually be able to hear the audio in the video because I've disabled my computer audio in my screen recording software. But let's just select this audio, bring it here, and then I can click on Display Waveform so that I can actually see that. And then to make this sound more mysterious and cool, I'm going to make it play slower. So to make it play slower, you can open up the time settings here on the side panel, and you can click on Show Retiming Keys. Now when you choose the show retiming keys, there's going to be 2 different keyframes right here. So if you just select the end one here on the bottom, you can hit G to grab and you can just bring it out, and that's going to stretch it out and make it longer. So now when I play this, it sounds much more mysterious and it sounds kind of sci-fi and kind of eerie. So that's going to make it sound really cool. And then also this volume here, I'm going to turn the volume down because it's a bit too loud. So I'll do the same thing. So I'll go to the add menu and I'll choose sound again. And I'm going to choose this next one here. So I'll choose this one. Let's bring this one up here. And then I can choose display waveform so I can actually see it. And then this one again, let's click on the show retiming keys, hit G to grab and make it much longer. Let's add the next one. So I'll go to the add menu and choose sound again. And then I'll choose this one here, add this one in. And also I'll add the other one in. So I'll go to the add menu, choose sound again, and I also need to add this one in here, so I'll choose that one. So now we have all 4 of them in the scene. Let's bring this up here so we can see that better. I'll choose display waveform, we can play this one, and then this one. Let's also choose the show retiming keys, and I'll drag that out to make it bigger. And then also let's turn the volume down because it's a bit too loud, and I'll play that. So that's kind of like an eerie shimmer, kind of like a shimmering metal, and it sounds much more like a shimmering metal if you make it longer and slower. And if you ever want to cut the strips, you can just press the K button to cut the strips. So just move it over here and then hit the K button to cut the strips. And I'll go here, this part is kind of silent, so I'll hit the K button again to cut the strips, and then I can just delete that there. All right, so you can see what I've done now is I've made all the sound effects fit within the time of 2 loops. So if I just drag this over here, you can see there's 1 loop, and then this one here, that is going to be 2 loops. So what I can do is join all of these together into a meta strip, and then all the sound effects, I can duplicate them to make them loop. So I'll deselect everything, I'll hit B for the box select, and I'm just going to box select all of the sound effects. And then I'll hit Control G, which is going to join them together into a meta strip. And then also at the starting and the end, I want to drag the handles over. So click on the handle, hit G to grab, move that over. And also here at the very end, make sure that is at the very end there. So now that little group of sounds is going to be the same length as 2 of these loops. So I can now just select this sound group. I'll press Shift D to duplicate it, drop it here, Shift D to duplicate it and drop it here. And so as I play this, it's going to just continue to loop because all the sounds are just replaying and they're starting and ending. So you can then select the strips and you can duplicate them and you can have it loop as many times as you want. So I'll now show you how to save this to a final video. So let's go up here to the output properties and I'm going to scroll down, and here on the output we want to choose a location to save our video. So let's click on the file icon and I'll just save this as final animation in the folder with my files and click on accept. And then here on the file format I'm going to be using the FFmpeg video. Let's open up the encoding here and scroll down. I'm going to use the container of MPEG-4. I'll use the video codec of H.264. I'm going to use medium quality and good. And then go here and open up the audio, and for the audio codec, I am going to use AAC. So then if you want to save this video editing file, you can, and then to render this, you can click on render and click on render animation, or you can press Ctrl F12. So I hope you enjoyed the tutorial and thank you for watching. And if you'd like to help support the channel and purchase the finished project files, you can get that on my Gumroad store and Patreon page. The links are in the description. And if you'd like to help support the channel here on YouTube, then a great way to do that is by checking out the YouTube memberships. And by joining the YouTube memberships, you'll be helping to support the channel monthly and you'll get some cool perks here on YouTube. And you can also use the super thanks feature here on YouTube to send me a little tip if you enjoyed this video. And if you'd like to watch more of my satisfying looping animation tutorials, you can definitely check out my satisfying looping animations tutorial playlist. Link to that is right there on the end screen. But I hope you enjoyed this, and thank you for watching.